distorted what actually happened, and it never acknowledged why they were out there to begin with.
I killed two
At
people.
a time
It was a kiss.
when the nation needed somebody to hear those complaints.
Protesters toppled and graffitied statues, including Confederate leaders and America's founding fathers who owned enslaved people. The president defended those figures.
We must protect and preserve our history, our
Give me that.
heritage,
That's mine. All that's mine.
our
man.
great
Why can't I take
heroes.
this
When you say
this
our
guy's
heritage,
there.
what it means is
Why
the
can't I
heritage
not
of
pick
white
up?
Southerners who
All right, no one's
identify with
I'm sorry, I had to murder us.
and its goal to break away from the United States.
Why the hell did you kill
The
two
effort
people?
seemingly a means to please his most ardent
my cup was going to
supporters.
go down so much.
Republicans largely stood behind the
For
president.
fuck's
The legacy of President
sake.
Trump's
I
first
was
term
silenced on four.
is an outsider
Why did you do that?
who wanted to build a wall, who
Oh,
wanted to connect
God.
with his base and fight with every critic.
And white Southerners, when you say our heritage,
Figures, founding fathers,
somebody out there to be distorted.
equality. Looting also rocked some cities. On a private call with governors, the president demanded a military-like response.
You have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a bunch of jerks.
It distorted what actually happened, and it never acknowledged why they were out there to begin with at a time when the nation needed somebody to hear those complaints.
Protesters toppled and graffitied statues, including Confederate leaders and America's founding fathers who owned enslaved people. The president defended those figures.
We must protect and preserve our history, our heritage, and our great heroes.
When you say our heritage, what he means is the heritage of white Southerners who identify with the Confederacy and its goal to break away from the United States.
The effort seemingly a means to please his most ardent supporters. Republicans largely stood behind the president.
The legacy of President Trump's first term is an outsider who wanted to build a wall, who wanted to connect with his base and fight with every critic, but along the way got Republicans many things they wanted. It was, for many of Republicans, the bargain of a lifetime, but it will have consequences for years to come.
Win or lose in November, President Trump has already remade the Republican Party in his image. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Yamichelle Sendor.
Now, a look at former Vice President Joe Biden, who has been in public office for decades. PBS NewsHour's Lisa Desjardins has this report on Biden's public life, his private life, fraught with resilience and tragedy, and his long march to this Democratic presidential nomination.
Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, the first child in a vivacious, tight-knit Catholic family.
Every single person, my dad used to say, no matter who they are, Joe, is entitled to be treated with dignity. A word, I think, that is probably used more here in Scranton, at least in my experience, than anywhere else.
Soon, tough times. His dad's business failed, and he ultimately moved the family to Delaware for a job. Tony Allen, president of Delaware State University, was a speechwriter for Biden in the 90s.
He tells the story of his father losing his job and the family having to move to Wilmington.
My dad, who fell on hard times, always told me, though, champ, when you get knocked down, get up. Get up.
In high school, Biden thrived as an athlete, but classmates called him Dash for his stutter. Author Stephen Levingston.
He was subjected to a lot of bullying, and he didn't want that to define him. So he worked really hard, staring in the mirror and working his lips and trying to make sure that he could speak.
He stayed in Delaware for college, and on a spring break trip, he met aspiring teacher Nelia Hunter. They married 2 years later. Biden got a law degree and almost immediately jumped into local politics in the state's largest county.
Joe Biden started his political career as a Newcastle County councilman.
The 20-something councilman soon had 3 small children. He also had growing ambition. And in 1972, Biden ran for U.S. Senate, an utter long shot.
Let's take a look now at some of the very close Senate races. Delaware is the first state. J. Caleb Boggs, who is the incumbent Republican, being challenged by Joseph Biden.
By just 3,000 votes in the end, he won. Biden was an instant national headline. Days after the election, he turned 30 and celebrated with his wife. But 1 month after that, tragedy. A car crash took the lives of wife Nelia and their 1-year-old daughter Naomi. Their sons Hunter and Beau were injured, and Biden, who initially considered resigning, was sworn into the Senate from beside Beau's hospital bed.
So help you God. I do. Congratulations, Senator. Thank you.
If in 6 months or so there's a conflict between my being a good father and being a good senator, which I hope will not occur, we can always get another senator, but they can't get another father.
Terrible tragedy.
Nina Totenberg is the justice correspondent for National Public Radio.
I have a dim recollection of him being sort of a zombie for a little while, just sort of walking through the steps that you take to survive.
Biden commuted on Amtrak some 4 hours a day to be home with his kids at night.
Joe Biden was a complete newbie. He was close to college age. And the people who really had power in the Senate in those days were the Dixiecrats, the old bulls. And he quickly discovered, I think, that if you wanted to get anything done, you had to go through them, and was very effective at it.
Things started moving quickly. In 1975, Biden was placed on the powerful Foreign Relations Committee, and a few years later, on the Judiciary Committee. He met teacher Jill Tracy Jacobs, and despite some proposal rejections, they married 2 years later, with the blessing of young Hunter and Beau.
I'm ashamed of the lack of moral backbone to this policy.
Still commuting to Washington by train, in the 1980s, Biden's life and profile grew. Daughter Ashley was born, and 1987 marked his first campaign for president.
It is the obligation of this generation to care for and protect the future of our children.
Almost immediately, Biden ran into trouble. He had taken to quoting a British Labour Party leader in his speeches. But at an August debate in Iowa, Biden did not attribute the following quote.
Why is it that Joe Biden is the first in his family ever to go to a university? Why is it that my wife, who's sitting out there in the audience, is the first in her family to ever go to college?
Back on Capitol Hill, Biden faced questions about the alleged plagiarism.
I saw that and it was a connect. I mean, I could tell how that man felt.
Within 1 week, he would drop out of the race, just as he faced another test.
There will be other opportunities for me to campaign for president, but there will not be many other opportunities for me to influence President Reagan's choice on the Supreme Court.
Biden, now chairman of the Judiciary Committee, oversaw the confirmation hearing of Judge Robert H. Bork to the Supreme Court. It was sharp from the beginning.
Having watched the Senate Judiciary Committee over the years, this is the one time where senators who were on offense actually were prepared. They asked good questions, they knew a lot about Bork, and Joe Biden led the charge.
Bork failed his confirmation vote.
The nomination is not confirmed.
Just a few months later, in 1988, a health crisis. Biden suffered 2 life-threatening aneurysms. A full 7 months of recovery later, he returned to the Senate floor.
I will not forget the sentiments expressed, the support given. It means a lot. Thank you very much.
Biden got back to work, and as the 90s opened, a new test. The nomination of Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court.
Clarence Thomas, seasoned now by more experience on the bench, fits my description of the best man at the right time.
Biden was still Judiciary Chairman. The committee learned about charges of sexual harassment against Thomas from his former assistant, Anita Hill.
You swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Other women came forward to testify, but Biden agreed with Republicans to limit the testimony to Hill alone. The televised hearings gripped the nation.
His conversations were very vivid. He spoke about acts that he had seen in pornographic films involving such matters as women having sex with animals and films showing group sex or rape scenes.
It would all make a searing impression on some women watching, like Amy Allison, the founder of the pro-women group She the People.
I was an undergraduate and I went to the common room in our dorm to watch the hearings. I saw the way that she was being treated by the white men on the Senate Judiciary Committee, both Democrat and Republican. Joe Biden was among them.
Biden stressed he would run a fair hearing.
I have not made my judgment based upon this proceeding because we have not heard all the evidence.
But his handling of it and the fact that other corroborating witnesses were never called has raised sharp scrutiny.
Just as the Republicans were really unprepared for the Bork hearings, the Democrats were unprepared for the fury and the determination of the Republicans, and that they would use any tactic to destroy the main witness against Thomas. Biden thought, my job is to be fair. But his fairness in the end was in many ways unfair to Anita Hill.
This entire proceeding is ended.
Biden spoke about the hearings last year.
As the committee chairman, I take responsibility that she did not get treated well. I take responsibility for that.
Later, Biden used the judiciary chairmanship for big policy pushes, including in 1994, the Violence Against Women Act, which created a national strategy for combating and prosecuting domestic abuse and sexual violence against women. He also led on a more controversial bill that was attached, the 1994 crime bill that imposed longer sentences for drug crimes and other offenses.
It may have seemed and did seem entirely reasonable in the middle of a crime epidemic. But in hindsight, it resulted in locking up a generation of black and brown and poor white people.
The gathering threat of Iran.
As the new century opened, with George W. Bush elected twice, Biden again thought it was his time. And he started dropping hints that he wanted another shot at the White House himself. In 2007, Joe Biden had been a U.S. Senator for 43 years, ready to try once again for a different job.
Friends, today I filed the necessary papers to become candidate for President of the United States.
In early January, he announced he was running for president.
All right.
But it was a rough start from the beginning. In an interview with the New York Observer, Biden described his presidential opponent, Barack Obama, saying, I mean, you got the first mainstream African American who is articulate and bright and clean and is a nice-looking guy. I mean, that's a storybook, man. Add to that stumble, he was battling a crowded, star-studded field. Author Steve Levinston wrote the book Barack and Joe.
Joe Biden's 2008 campaign flamed out pretty quickly. He never really got any traction.
Biden dropped out in January 2008 after placing 5th in the Iowa caucuses. He left the trail, choosing not to endorse either of the frontrunners, his fellow senators, Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama.
Hope is what led me here today.
In late May, Obama emerged as the presumptive nominee, in need of a running mate. Patty Solis Doyle was waiting for the news, too. She was chief of staff to whomever would be picked for VP.
Obama and his team were really looking for someone who could partner in the actual governing because there was so much to do. They were looking for someone who could bring some of the demographic constituents that the then nominee did not have, in particular, white working class voters. And lo and behold, Joe Biden checked all those boxes.
Obama was just a junior senator who didn't have a lot of experience with legislation, getting things through Congress. Biden was a master. He was able to go across the aisle. He could really help Obama legislatively.
On August 23rd, Obama announced his choice.
Joe Biden is that rare mix. For decades, he's brought change to Washington, but Washington hasn't changed him. He's an expert on foreign policy whose heart and values are firmly rooted in the middle class.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is no ordinary time. This is no ordinary election. And this may be our last chance to reclaim the America we love.
Right away, Biden hit the campaign trail.
Welcome to the first and the only 2008 vice presidential debate.
In a debate hosted by NewsHour's late Gwen Ifill, Biden took on his vice presidential opponent, then Alaska Governor Sarah Palin.
Nice to meet you.
Hey, can I call you Joe? Okay.
Biden focused on withdrawal from Iraq and appeal to a nervous middle class.
I understand, as well as, with all due respect, the governor or anybody else, what it's like for those people sitting around that kitchen table. And guess what? They're looking for help. They're looking for help. They're not looking for more of the same.
On Election Day, the Obama-Biden ticket made history, ushering in the first African-American president.
I was never the likeliest candidate for this office. This is your victory.
For Biden, the day they won, I think he took maybe a few hours to really just sort of celebrate. That his initial thoughts were, let's roll up our sleeves, we got to go.
At the time, the economy was losing hundreds of thousands of jobs a month. Just weeks after inauguration, Congress passed a $787 billion stimulus plan. Obama put Biden in charge of overseeing how the money was spent. It was the first of many Biden bridges to Congress, including health care reform. And later, he would be the key negotiator with Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell in a fiscal crisis.
He had these long standing relationships on both sides of the aisle, both Democrat and Republican. And when you have a divided government, that's a very important role.
But Biden also caused heartburn by going off script, including his words to his boss the day the Affordable Care Act was signed. He also got mixed attention for how he touched people, sometimes tightly embracing or putting hands on shoulders, like with Stephanie Carter, wife of the incoming defense secretary. Some, like Carter, said it was a show of empathy. But in 2019, a half dozen women would say he made them uncomfortable. Biden responded to the allegations of unwanted touching with a video, saying he heard the women and would be more aware of others' personal space. But then one of the women, a former Senate staffer named Tara Reid, would add to her charges, saying Biden sexually assaulted her.
He just had me up against the wall, and the wall was cold. And I remember it happened all at once. The gym bag, I don't know where it went. I handed it to him, it was gone, and then his hands were on me and underneath my clothes.
Biden addressed the charge on MSNBC.
No, it is not true. I'm saying unequivocally, it never happened. And it didn't. It never happened.
When he was vice president, though, Biden's verbal missteps were his greatest controversy. In 2012, on NBC's Meet the Press, Biden was asked about gay marriage, something the Obama White House had not yet endorsed.
I am absolutely comfortable with the fact that men marrying men, women marrying women, and heterosexual men and women marrying women all are entitled to the same exact rights, all the civil rights, all the civil liberties.
3 days later, Obama made his own announcement.
At a certain point, I've just concluded that, for me personally, it is important for me to go ahead and affirm that I think same-sex couples should be able to get married.
Now, while this looks like a gaffe in a big way and may seem to alter policy, I feel that it really wasn't a policy-altering gaffe. It was a policy-speeding gaffe, in a sense that Obama was heading that direction anyway, and Joe sort of gave him the nudge.
Obama and Biden, who barely knew one another at the start of their campaign, were now a close-knit team.
Talk about our bromance.
The political bromance launched scores of internet memes.
We saw pictures of them laughing together, hanging out together, going out for burgers together, putting on the White House green together. This was unique in terms of what a vice president and a president did.
Obama knew what he was good at. Biden knew what he was good at. And they worked it out like two people who, had worked together for years and years.
That relationship helped to support Biden when tragedy came again to his family. Biden's oldest child, Beau, died of brain cancer in May of 2015. He was 46, a combat veteran who'd been to Iraq, and a promising politician serving as Delaware's attorney general.
And he'd walk over, give me a kiss, and say, "Dad, you got enough
Biden,
coffee?"
in an interview with PBS NewsHour.
Beau was always the guy who, as Barack said, the president said at his eulogy, Beau was Joe 2.0.
Tony Allen worked for Joe Biden in the 90s as a speechwriter and special assistant.
When Beau Biden died, it was devastating to the vice president, and it was devastating to Delaware because we already knew all the tragedy that he had suffered. When the vice president of the Biden family lost Beau, I felt like we all lost Beau.
For Biden, it was existential in a way, in the same way that when he lost his first wife in that car crash many years earlier, when he first became a senator, he doubted everything. Going back to his wife's death, at that time, Biden, who was a very religious man, a very strong Catholic, began to doubt God.
At the time, Biden was considering yet another run for the presidency, but Beau's death put a pause on those plans. In the end, Biden decided not to run that year. Just like so many times in his life, after facing personal tragedy, Biden fought his way back to run in 2020. For the first time in his life, he won a presidential primary, and then the votes for the nomination.
Marrying men, women marrying women, and heterosexual men and women marrying women all are entitled to the same exact rights, all the civil rights, all the civil liberties.
3 days later, Obama made his own announcement.
At a certain point, I've just concluded that for me personally, it is important for me to go ahead and affirm that I think same-sex couples should be able to get married.
Now, while this looks like a gaffe in a big way and may seem to alter policy, I feel that it really wasn't a policy-altering gaffe. It was a policy-speeding gaffe, in a sense that Obama was heading that direction anyway, and Joe sort of gave him the nudge.
Obama and Biden, who barely knew one another at the start of their campaign, were now a close-knit team.
Talk about our bromance.
The political bromance launched scores of internet memes.
We saw pictures of them laughing together, hanging out together, going out for burgers together, putting on the White House green together. This was unique in terms of what a vice president and a president did.
Obama knew what he was good at. Biden knew what he was good at. And they worked it out like two people who, had worked together for years and years.
That relationship helped to support Biden when tragedy came again to his family. Biden's oldest child, Beau, died of brain cancer in May of 2015. He was 46, a combat veteran who'd been to Iraq, and a promising politician serving as Delaware's attorney general.
Secret laboratory.
An interview with PBS NewsHour.
Beau was always the guy who, as Barack said, the president said in his eulogy,
Levy, are you on the party bus?
Burnt alive 2.0.
Tony Allen worked for Joe Biden in the 90s as a speechwriter and special assistant.
When Beau Biden died, it was devastating to the vice president, and it was devastating to Delaware because we already knew all the tragedy that he had suffered. When the vice president of the Biden family lost Beau, I felt like we all lost Beau.
Yes.
It was existential in a way, in the same way that when he lost his first wife in that car crash many years earlier, when he first became a senator, he doubted everything. Going back to his wife's death, at that time, Biden, who was a very religious man, a very strong Catholic, began to doubt God.
At the time, Biden was considering yet another run for the presidency, but Beau's death put a pause on those plans. In the end, Biden decided not to run that year. Just like so many times in his life, after facing personal tragedy, Biden fought his way back to run in 2020. For the first time in his life, he won a presidential primary, and then the votes for the nomination itself. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Desjardins.
That was Lisa Desjardins. I'm Daniel Bush. This is PBS NewsHour's pre-show coverage ahead of the first presidential debate of the 2020 election. Welcome to everyone. Next, we're going to take a pause and look at some major issues in this election and how both candidates have gone about presenting ideas for how to tackle them. We're going to start with climate change. Amy Shalcindar and Lisa Desjardins have more on that.
As is the case on so many topics on the issue of stopping climate change, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are on opposite sides. Biden's approach stresses a much tougher stance and aggressive timeline on emissions. He aims to make U.S. power emissions-free by to do that, he takes executive actions, including
I'm like pyro when I do that.
standards for cars and trucks, and stricter limits on methane pollution from oil and gas. There's also the issue of international cooperation to curb climate change. Think about the landmark Paris Climate Accord. While Donald Trump, remember, moved to withdraw the U.S.
President, I can put no other consideration before the well-being of American citizens.
I love how the lava just flings you.
Entering into an agreement that
Joe Biden has said the U.S.
Lava just sends you straight to Brazil the second you touch it.
The climate accord in Paris. Convince the Chinese to join it. We got almost 200 nations to agree. What's this guy doing?
President Trump, in contrast, believes government has gone too far to protect the environment.
Guys, whoever has no clip, come to this little lava pit.
The Trump administration
Who could do the best
dozens and dozens of environmental rules and regulations.
As and trucks. Some executive
with climate change. Yamiche Alcindor and Lisa Desjardins have more for us on that.
As is the case on so many topics on the issue of stopping climate change, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are on opposite sides. Biden's approach stresses a much tougher stance and aggressive timeline on emissions. He aims to make U.S. power emissions-free by the year 2035. To do that, he some executive actions, including toward new fuel economy standards for cars and trucks, and stricter limits on methane pollution from oil and gas companies. There's also the issue of international cooperation to curb climate change. Think about the landmark Paris Climate Accord. While Donald Trump, remember, moved to withdraw the U.S. from it.
As president, I can put no other consideration before the well-being of American citizens. The Paris Climate Accord is simply the latest example of Washington entering into an agreement that disadvantages the United States.
Joe Biden has said the U.S. should be in it.
I helped put together the climate accord in Paris. Convince the Chinese to join it. We got almost 200 nations to agree. What's this guy doing?
President Trump, in contrast, believes government has gone too far to protect the environment and has harmed businesses. As part of that idea, the Trump administration has rolled back dozens and dozens of environmental rules and regulations, according to a New York Times count. That includes several intended to slow climate change. One example, the Obama-era rule that held automakers to tougher fuel efficiency standards for their cars. Earlier this year, President Trump made the standards more lenient. Another example from last year, pollution from coal plants. Though the Supreme Court suspended them, Obama-era rules paved the way for national limits on coal plant emissions and pushed utility companies away from coal. But the new Trump rule gives states leeway to take a more lenient stance on emissions if they want. That's an approach that coal industry leaders support. The administration claims that carbon emissions in the power industry will still go down. Trump and Biden starkly disagree over what to do and on whether climate is an issue government should tackle at all.
For more than 6 months, the coronavirus pandemic has upended